Good day, and welcome to the Normal Answers Weekly Wraps. I'm Viv Govender, and as usual, what we'll do is we'll go over some stories of the week as well as do a bit of a tech/AI wrap at the end. Our three stories of the week are going to be as follows. We're discussing China and commodities. Then we'll discuss what happened with inflation this week, and finally a little revision coming through with regards to US GDP. In the tech segment, I think this week we'll focus on Deepmind. We've talked about LLMs for quite a bit, but Deepmind has quietly been doing some incredible things in AI that has nothing to do with LLMs. And I think that it bears noting, like, some of these things could have incredible economic advantages in the future, or potential in the future, and I think it's worth looking at them. Okay, let's start off with China and significant mining. Before I do the segment, it must be noted that this week we had a tragedy at Ipala. Several people died, and many more were injured. Mining is a very dangerous activity, and it was never, when people watch miners going on strike and protesting for higher wages. I mean, understand that the vast majority of people watching that would never take that job with the risks involved and the discomfort and the etc. with the wages being offered. It is an incredibly dangerous job. It's an incredibly unpleasant job usually. You're going underground and it's not very nice, etc. Difficult job often results in long-term health issues if you survive, the dangers involved, and the pay is, quite low if you look at, for instance, the associated risks, etc. you undertake. So Chinese manufacturing numbers came out this week. The PMI was below 50, so a contraction. I think we've seen downgrades come through for Chinese economic activity for next year. This is to be expected. The Chinese economy is in some serious trouble at the moment. They need to have some kind of systematic, change because they have, real issues, systematic issues in the country, structural issues in the country that need to be rectified. I mentioned many times in the past that the property sector, which has been a real source of both private sector wealth as well as GDP growth, accounting for like a third of GDP growth and almost 2/3 or more than 2/3 of private sector wealth. That bubble is over. They have a declining population. They've hit a point at which they can't really build much more infrastructure at the current economic level, and so there's some real problems there that need to be solved, and the government needs to do something about that. A good sign has been that the government is the reason that the bubble recently burst. If it hadn't been for the bubble, government burst in the bubble, this might have continued for a few more years and been an even bigger problem down the line. So that's a bit of positivity out of them. But the thing is that China's infrastructure build, etc., has been incredibly important for countries like South Africa, which make commodities. Without the Chinese demand for commodities, commodity prices would be much lower, or volumes would have to be much lower. And that has been, a big negative for South Africa. And it's going to be a big negative, I think, a drag on our commodity sector for a long time. We have to readjust. We could hope that other, sources of demand come up. Maybe the near-shoring, onshoring for the US and Europe, etc., requires them to build more stuff. Maybe the rise of India, which we'll talk about in a second, requires, more resources. But right now, there's nothing that's going to take the place of China. And that's going to be, I think, a very bad, sign for economic activity in the commodity exporting countries. I said India as well. India came up with the GDP numbers this week, about 7.6. They expected 6.8, but for the last quarter, it's a little bit of slowdown from the previous quarter, but it's still better than expected. And India is said to be the fastest growing large economy in the world. Next thing we'll talk about is US, GDP numbers coming out. Those US GDP numbers were revised up to 5.2, and you look at it, the US is 5.2, not as much as say 7.8, but the US is a vastly larger country. To give an idea how big this is, 5.2, annualized growth rate is effectively adding the entire Russian economy to the US in a single year. That's the kind of size we're talking about. We're growing faster, likely in the next year at the moment than maybe the Chinese are, or like really close to them. And again, the US, China, probably they're around but close to the same size in terms of total GDP. But because the US has vastly fewer people, the per person, the average American is incredibly wealthy. And in fact, people often don't understand this. They think the US and Europe are about the same. They think the person in England, the person in the US, they're both rich Western countries. They're both kind of well off. Similar. They think the US and Europe similar. No, it's not. The US is significantly wealthier on an individual basis than the European Union is, or a European citizen in the European Union is, or a UK citizen is. An average American is much, much wealthier than the average person in the UK or the average person in Europe. There are individual places in the world where people are wealthier than the US. You could talk to like smaller places like Singapore, Luxembourg, etc., or some of the Gulf states. But they're talking about very small populations that are wealthier than the US. For its size, there's no country in the world that's wealthier than the US per person. That's more than about 50 million people or so. Think even a few tens of millions of people. You're not going to find many places in the world that are wealthier than the US per person. And the US has over 300 million people in it. So yeah, very good GDP numbers. And we also saw inflation coming down as well. We saw, European inflation coming down significantly. We've seen inflation numbers in the US coming down. The only place in the world that appears that inflation is not coming down quite nicely is in South Africa. South Africa obviously has had issues with things like, for instance, the food inflation for bird flu, etc., for the weaker rand and so on. But it's an important point to note that we are seeing inflation coming down significantly. So what's happening right now is we are seeing that markets are starting to price rate cuts early next year. So they're putting like a 90+%, like close to 100% effectively, a chance of a rate cut in the US by the middle of next year. I think there's a reasonable chance it happens. I don't know if it's 100%, but I think it's it's quite a substantial chance that we're going to have a rate cut in the US by that point in time. One, probably, not two. Again, they also priced that similar kind of thing happening in Europe. I think maybe they've been looking at the possibility of two cuts there. Why would that be happening? Well, because inflation is coming down and economic activity, though it's strong, is showing a few signs of issues. In the US, we saw home sales come down dramatically, and the reason being is quite simple. People are not putting their houses up for sale. People don't want to be buying houses basically and giving up their old house. Why? Let's just say you bought $1 million house. You have a 3% bond on it. Okay, that's fine. That's happy because 3% is not nothing, but it's tangible. If they were to sell that $1 million house, I'm going to buy say $1.5 million because people usually want to move up when they buy property. Then you see that instead of basically paying a 3% mortgage, they might be paying a 7% mortgage, which is a significantly more painful mortgage to have. I mean, South Africa would love to have a 7% mortgage. I'd be killing for a 7% mortgage. But in the US, that's quite a high mortgage rate, historically, at least in the recent history. And so people are less willing to sell what they have right now and move into something new. And that is one of the reasons we are seeing supply in the market being low and people not buying many houses. And then let's go into our deep dive coming through with regards to AI. This week, we're going to be discussing Deepmind, deep dive into Deepmind, basically. And why I'm bringing it up is because I think that often in the excitement we've had recently for LLMs, because LLMs have been incredibly, useful and not quite useful, but incredibly interesting. Let us say that they do things that we find fascinating. Writing poetry or writing stories or answering questions or drawing pictures and that kind of stuff. Generative AI has been the thing that's gotten a lot of attention. But while generative AI has got a lot of attention, a company like Deepmind has been working on other kinds of AI out there, and they've had some really smart and really brilliant results. One of the things they've done in the past was a thing called AlphaFold, which is about predicting the shape of a protein from its formula. So if you say this is a formula for the protein, what shape do we have? And they can predict the shape of that protein for the formula. Doesn't sound like a very difficult thing, but historically, this would take a PhD level student almost his entire PhD, studying time to come up with like one, a structure. You do that, and you almost that's worthy of a PhD, So we weren't looking at a lot of them being created in any given point in time. Very expensive, very time consuming, etc. With AI, they've managed to basically solve, I think, 200 million of these things. Now, what this does is it basically allows people that design medicines and so on to understand how to create medicines that are going to work with certain proteins, how to create new treatments for illnesses and so on. It's a bit beyond my pay grade, but from the articles I've read, it basically is a massive boon to medicine. And it will take obviously many years for this stuff to come through into the public, but it's obviously something that is going to have an impact on the world. And this is just something that has come and gone with not many people like discussing it. The next one is another thing called alpha tensor. And what it does is it creates matrix multiplication algorithms. Doesn't sound like much, but if you look at like a lot of scientific applications, a lot of industrial applications, you'll find that getting better algorithms, cutting down the time it takes to do certain things, algorithmically processing-wise, makes a huge difference in terms of productivity. And this particular AI comes up with a couple of these examples. And more recently, we had an example with the weather, where OpenAI, but Deepmind, right, developed a AI system that can predict the weather. Now, the way the weather is predicted currently is what you have is data collected around the world, okay, put together in any given into a huge supercomputer. The supercomputer goes out and does a like modeling of what they expect the weather is to be like, and usually you collect the data from around like the country or whatever. You put it in, you get a model working on it, and you can get an answer roughly once every say 6 hours or so. With this particular thing, instead of having, and by the way, the agency that runs this particular thing, for instance, in the US, has like a budget of $1 billion or so. So it's a very computer intensive kind of exercise that is required for this, and to get a result, like I said, once every 6 hours. And what they found was with AI, they built a program that could run on your PC, not like the lowest end PC, but easily a PC that a normal human could purchase, normal person could purchase. It's expensive, but it's like in the realm of being purchased. It's not $1 billion, and it gives a result in a minute, and the results are marginally better than what you'd get from the old system. So a fraction of the cost, a fraction of the time, and slightly better. Again, huge implications globally, because now you can have people running simulations that can give you a clear idea about rain, about weather, and that obviously impacts a lot of human activity. And you also allow places in the world that may not have had the ability to go and have the infrastructure development that the US has been like $1 billion a year. Some of the poorer countries able to basically go out and figure out how their weather is going to be in the future and make obviously decisions based on that. And also something else that's come out from Deepmind, in the last few days or so, is something called GNOME. And this is like we talked about with the protein folding problem. This thing does, structures, crystal structures, but it does it for materials. And what it does is it gives possible stable structures for materials. And why this is important is you get a new material, and often you'll find that there's uses in it. Some things a little softer, maybe there's use for softness. Maybe there's something a little harder, there's use for hardness. Something more durable, like there's use of that. Something that's a bit stronger, but like more flexible. Whatever it is, having new materials changes how you can do a lot of stuff. Imagine you had a material that was, say, 1,000 times stronger than steel. How would that affect the world? Okay. Imagine a material, a metal, for instance, that was softer than like a marshmallow, like a tiny little soft bit of thing, but that has impact somewhere. Who knows? Maybe you can put for like dampening systems. Imagine you had a material that's more conductive than gold. Again, very interesting in terms of the applications you can have. When it comes to these kind of materials, it's a huge business out there. Just like I said with the medicines, with protein folding, and apparently the new GNOME system, GNOME, it stands for the exploration of materials, something like that. It's good, like one of the weird acronyms, but this system has developed, I think, a couple million possible materials. It'll take a lifetime, multiple lifetimes to test over them. And what they've also had historically is something like an 80% accuracy in terms of developing a stable materials. So likely we like to see over 1 million, 1.5 million or so of these materials being stable. That means they're not going to just immediately fall apart. And stable materials are what you want to be looking at, because that allows you to basically do stuff with it. So incredibly useful. And I bring this up because we often are caught up in the LLM, like I said, generative AI kind of bubble. and forget that AI is just information in, a result out, predictive result out. Words in, you can predict words out. Pictures in, you can predict pictures out. Put in material science, you might get material science answers. Put it weather in, you get weather answers. And this is something I think we need to look at going forward, because I honestly do believe that that's going to have a huge impact on the world. Yes, it's great to have a digital assistant. It's probably better to have something that can actually, help you predict, where to plant your crops, or where to dig for materials or minerals or something like that, which I think is another, huge avenue coming out. I think mining especially is going to benefit a lot. Mining exploration is going to benefit a lot from AI. Okay, that's it for this week. Enjoy your week, and look forward to speaking again next weekend. Cheers.